If we bequeath to posterity some beautiful thought, some worthy thing, and leave behind the fruits of our labor to help those who follow to make the world more beautiful, we shall have fulfilled our destiny. Michael Jacobs, artist and author. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. John Pototschnik is a fine art painter who resides in Wylie, Texas. As a young boy, his parents instilled in him a strong work ethic. Doing chores, selling his mother's cookies door to door, and having a newspaper route, all these experiences would lay the foundation for how John approaches the work of being a professional artist today. He began his professional career as an illustrator. The discipline of meeting deadlines and being attuned to a client's needs further honed his creative skills. After 10 years working as an illustrator, John made the leap to working full-time as a fine art painter. However, that leap did not come without challenges. For example, in order to overcome the tendency toward using highly saturated colors common to illustration work, John dove into an intense period of experimentation with color. In time, that experimentation led to using a limited palette. Mastering the limited palette proved to be key in achieving beautiful paintings with high dynamic range and expressive color that John is known for. Today, students rave about his color workshops. You may recall in a previous episode of The Artful Painter that Amanda Lovett shared how attending John's color workshop was transformative to her. John recently wrote a book for artists called Limited Palette, Unlimited Color, which also has a companion instructional video. John's paintings may bring to the viewer's mind childhood memories, but that is not necessarily his primary intent. His desire is to create something beautiful that draws people in. He considers himself primarily a landscape painter. He loves small-town neighborhoods and the atmosphere found in those neighborhoods. He captures the beauty of those small towns and rural landscapes, both outdoors and in his studio. John Pototschnik's mastery of color and values, all using a limited palette, lead to beautifully harmonious paintings that speak to the heart. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. You know, when I was talking to Amanda Lovett, she said, I just have to talk to you. And I had heard of you when I talked to her. She talked about her involvement with your book, Limited Palette, Unlimited Color. And I agreed with her. I said, I've got to talk with you. And so here we are, we're talking.
Yeah, that's nice. Amanda's, she's super, as you know. You did a great interview with her. And she's very supportive of what our collaboration together. And I really couldn't have done the book without her. She was instrumental in pulling that whole thing together because I was asked to, prepare everything, have everything prepared for the printer and have it ready to go to put on the press. And shoot, I couldn't do that stuff.
Sometimes we just have to lean on other people.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about that book later on in our conversation, but I'd like for everyone to get to know you just a little bit better. I know when I look at your paintings, this is what I think of. Okay, so when I was a young boy, my mother used to ship us off to my grandmother who lived up near Chattanooga, Tennessee. She was way out in the country. Actually, it was called Sand Mountain. Sand Mountain is a little limestone plateau that runs parallel with Lookout Mountain. Mm-hmm. And they lived on a farm, and I loved going up there because they had a big old farm, fields of corn. My grandfather raised hogs, and every morning for breakfast, she would pull out this huge can of Cisco lard, some flour, and a cast iron skillet, and make these lard biscuits.
Oh, my goodness.
And when they were done, they would float out the pans.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I loved eating that. But see, that's an intense memory I had of that experience. The reality of they led a very hard life. He was my grandfather was a logger. Before they started using mechanization, it was using mules and an old flatbed pickup truck to to get all that. But there's a nostalgia that I have as a kid. And my point is, when I look at your paintings, I can feel like I'm being transported back in time to when I went to my grandmother and ate 4 or 5 of those lard biscuits each and every morning when I was with her. Where does that come from with you?
Man, you just speaking here, I mean, it brings back so many memories of my childhood, too, and my grandmother and grandfather. I mean, they lived in Pittsburgh, Kansas. We grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and that's probably about a 3-hour drive or so from Wichita. And I always enjoyed going to their place. My grandmother was a great gardener. Her garden was incredible.
Oh, wow.
And like you, she was a brilliant cook, but I remember her always, she'd bring out these huge meals for the family, and we could never eat enough. We'd be stuffed, and she said, "We got to eat more. You got to eat more here. There's still food left." Those childhood memories are exactly what you were saying. They come through on my paintings. I really can't help it. Those things are what have really made us who we are today. And I find as I get older that I do reflect more on childhood and those things that were important in my life in the growing up years. So yeah, it comes through in the paintings. It's really not even intentional, Carl. If I had figures or something like that, it creates a little narrative story, but I'm not really trying to communicate childhood memories as such. It just sort of comes out naturally.
What is your intent? What are you trying to communicate?
Well, I'm really trying to create something beautiful and that draws people in. So I'm primarily a landscape painter, but I love the neighborhoods, small town neighborhoods, and the whole atmosphere of those neighborhoods. There was a sense, at least when I was growing up, there was that sense of safety. You could play outside, you could run. Your parents really weren't worried about you that much if you ran down the street or down the road to a small store or whatever. They were never concerned about that. And I loved all that. I remember growing up that my mom was trying to help me out because I wanted to buy my first bicycle. And so she started making homemade cookies. And I would go door to door. I can't even imagine doing that now. Go door to door at nighttime, knocking on doors and saying, "Hey, I got some homemade cookies here my mom made. Would you like to buy some?" And then I had a paper route and, collected for the paper route in the evenings at dark. And I'm thinking, man, there isn't any way I could possibly let my children do that today. So I guess it is that kind of stuff, Carl, that comes through in the paintings. It's just deeply set in there, and it just comes out. It's those things I guess I like to recreate.
It sounds like you developed a very strong work ethic as a young boy, and that must carry over into what you do as a painter today.
My dad you would call him very strict by today's standards, and we were held accountable and responsible, and we had our daily chores we had to do, and we had to check them off. My mom would create these are your chores you're to do this week, and we had to check them off as we did them, make sure we did them. And I remember I had to shine all the family shoes every week. There's just stuff like that. We were held accountable and responsible, and we were expected to use our time wisely. So, yeah, that was really stress in our home life.
Well, we have something in common. I had to shine the shoes, I had to wash the dishes, and I had to make up my bed each morning before I went to school.
There you go. It's the same deal.
But, I don't have any regrets from that. I think it did help a great deal, help me to be more responsible.
You're accountable and you're responsible. I think that those are good. Those are good traits.
So how do those traits play into your process of painting?
Well, I try to keep a pretty solid schedule. I mean, it's like going to a job every day, whether I was working in my studio here in the home or whether I had to go to a job off-site somewhere. I handled it exactly the same. I show up in the morning every day in the studio, and I work throughout the day as if I was on a real job, whether I feel like it or not. And so I think, that all played into it. It's a business that I'm in, and I have to make a living at it. So you have to treat it like a real job.
So you view it as a job, but do you ever lose the joy of painting because it is like a job? It is something you have to make a living at.
No, I think that's the important thing of having a job that we're passionate about and love. I mean, we continue to enjoy it. Not that there aren't frustrations with the work. I mean, painting is difficult. It's not an easy thing to create something that's significant. But no, I never tire of it. Most days I look forward to getting in there and working on a painting. Not every day, but the days that I don't, I still show up and work at it. But no, I've never lost my passion for it. I still enjoy it and still try to grow as an artist.
Well, you started off as a illustrator, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I did. I freelanced for 10 years in the Dallas area. And it was tough starting out because I really had very little training. I went to 4 years of college, and I look back now and think, what in the world did I really learn about art in college? And then I took a commission in the Air Force, and they sent me to California, and I was able to go to Art Center College at night. And that's where I feel I really learned some of the important things about art and creating art. So when I got out of the Air Force, moved to Dallas, and immediately started promoting myself as a freelance illustrator. And I remember that first 3 months, I saw 135 agencies. That number sticks in my mind because it was a hard thing to go see that many people.
Yeah,
in a 3-month period. But I really saw a lot of agencies, got my name out there in front of people, and the work started coming in. Initially, it was black and white, pen and ink spot drawings for newspaper ads or magazine articles. And then gradually, as my career developed, I started doing dyes, Dr. Martin dyes I was using, which is basically a watercolor. And then by the end of my career, I was doing acrylic paintings, full color paintings. But it was a process. It took a few years to develop, but I did that for 10 years. And then I noticed this was in the late 70s then, and I noticed that more and more illustrators are leaving the field and getting into fine art. And so I thought, well, this is what I really always wanted to do, but was told you'll never make a living at it. And so in 1982, I decided to make the leap from illustration to fine art. And how I did that is I had a friend who was a vice president at Texas Oil and Gas, and he knew of my interest to get into fine art. And he said that, well, have you ever thought about doing some paintings of showing the coexistence of wildlife and oil, that the two can coexist together?
Interesting.
Yeah. And so that's what we did. I developed 6 paintings. I went out to various oil rig sites in Texas primarily. Even got up on the oil rigs. I mean, they put me on a hoist and hoisted me up. It was really cool. But I did a series of 6 paintings combining wildlife and oil, the oil development. And then we found 6 corporate sponsors that would sponsor the program, and they got first choice in the order that they signed up. They got first choice of the painting, of the 6 paintings. And then we did a series of limited reproductions of those paintings, and they got each an equal number of all 6 reproductions. And so that's how I funded my first year in fine art.
Well, aren't you glad that your mother made you get out there and sell chocolate chip cookies or whatever kind of cookies they were?
It does kind of contributes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those life experiences helped you knock on those 135 agency doors, and and then the leap into fine art. Are those paintings still available? Are they on public display anywhere?
They're not on public. In fact, I don't even know where those corporate headquarters are right now. But I know the paintings exist in the corporate headquarters, but the prints, I've had people contact me periodically and say, man, I saw this print and I would love to purchase them, but they're all gone. They've just disappeared into the vapor. I think they're all sold and distributed, and I can't even find them on the internet anywhere.
Were there advantages of being an illustrator before you went into fine art?
Man, totally. The thing about illustration is the whole thing is you have to satisfy the client. You have to satisfy the art director, and you're working with multiple people. And that is a challenge. Plus, the most difficult, I think, is meeting deadlines, because it seems like everything is last minute in illustration. Yeah, so all that training at midnight, trying to figure out how to salvage a painting that's due at 8 o'clock in the morning, that's tough.
Yeah.
And I had that a few times, many all-nighters trying to meet deadlines. So, yeah, trying to work out the difficulties and the faults of the weaknesses in a painting, and still delivered on time and satisfy the client. Yeah, that was a tough part.
Are there any illustrators that you looked up to or were inspired by at that time?
Yeah, the period I was illustrating was from 72 to 82. And the really big names at that time were Mark English, Bernie Fuchs, and Bob Peak. Those were, I would say, at the top of the heap in the illustration field at that time. And those guys I really admired. They're all deceased now, but incredible illustrators. They were trendsetters, and all unique, all totally different, but brilliant. Each one of them brilliant.
Well, I came into all of this much later in life, and of course I was in software development for a long time, but my work touched on graphic design, so I would often have to deal with art direction and that sort of thing. So, and I remember looking at Step by Step Graphics magazine and seeing advertisements to study under people like Mark English. And
oh, you know the name, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then there's I saw his works up close and personal for the first time just before this pandemic started. There is a woman that lives near Newnan, Georgia. She has a beautiful farm. She hosts art classes and things like that, invites artists to come and teach there. It's just an incredibly beautiful setting, but she has a most amazing art collection, which includes Mark English.
My goodness.
She was good friends with him, and then she wrote the foreword, I think. Is that what? Yeah, she wrote the foreword to his book, which you can't hardly find right now. I wish I could find a copy of it.
Yeah, it did. She must have had one of his fine art paintings, because she does, because his illustrations were, oh my goodness, I can't describe how much I love them. This I thought it was very interesting. I had the opportunity to see. Do you know Bob Peak's name? Have you ever heard of him?
Yes, I have.
He did a lot of stuff for Sports Illustrated. But I had an opportunity to view one of his originals one time. I could not believe it. And it just showed the difference between a printed piece and the original piece. He had so many pieces pasted onto that thing. It looked like a collage. And yet when it was printed, it looked fabulous. And so it was just an eye-opener for me. But those three guys, just brilliant.
Wow. Well, were there any disadvantages to having an illustration background in making the transition to fine art?
No, I can't think of any, Carl. That it is a totally different field, though. Because when I got into fine art, I thought, well, I can just take the prices I'm getting from illustrations and convert those over to my fine art pieces. And that just flat did not work at all. I wasn't selling anything, couldn't sell anything. And people were saying initially, when I would approach a gallery, they'd say, oh, you're an illustrator, aren't you? And of course, that isn't what I wanted to hear, because my stuff was supposed to look like paintings, like fine art. And
well, why would they say that? How would they identify you as an illustrator?
Hard-edged, too intense color, unnatural in appearance. In illustration, of course, you're trying to catch the viewer's eye, and it has to be dramatic and strong and all those things. And fine art, and particularly as I've grown as an artist, I find much more enjoyable art to be found in the subtleties of a painting. And I've developed my work that way where it's much more subtle now. But yeah, the illustration just totally different in appearance. I talked to a friend of mine who was a former illustrator here in Dallas, and he had made the switch to fine art. And he said how you're going to get around this is you need to go outside and start painting on location. And it was then that I actually took his advice and went out, and I realized my colors were way too intense. They were nothing that even approached what nature really looked like. And that, again, the edges, everything was too hard and distinct and just didn't look like what I was experiencing nature at all. So that was a huge eye-opener for me.
Painting outdoors.
Painting outdoors, it really helped. And I realized, okay, I've got a long way to go. And so I started doing on-location paintings, and I think that really helped me. And then just, a lot of study and trying things, and it grew that way. But as far as disadvantages, that was the main thing, I think, making that switch was going from the illustration look to the fine art look, and that took a while. Plus, the other thing that happened is I could not get the prices at all. Nothing was selling. And I didn't know what to do. I was doing art festivals and things like that. And
that's a grind right there.
Oh, tremendous grind, yeah. Very difficult way to make a living. And so I cut all my prices in half from my illustration prices, and still nothing sold. And so I cut all my prices in half again, and then I started selling on a regular basis. And the other thing I started doing was, rather than doing large, significant paintings in fine art, I did small paintings. I thought, okay, if I do a small painting, I can grow faster because I'll be doing a lot more of them. And so I was working probably 9 by 12 and smaller for everything I was doing. And I created a pretty good collector base over time, and I made it a point to save all those names, addresses, everything, and I kept in touch with those people. And I think that really helped grow my career.
Very nice. That was pre-internet then. That was in the early 80s, I suppose?
Yes, 82 I started in fine art, yeah. Early 80s, yeah.
So how did you get the word out about those paintings at that time?
Well, I did the festivals, and then I was very consistent about doing a newsletter. So as soon as I started building a collector base, I would regularly communicate with those collectors through my newsletter. And I did a monthly newsletter, and it was very informative and helpful and expressed appreciation and all that. And then I did those art festivals, like I said. That helped. And then I was in a local gallery, maybe 10 miles from me in a town called Plano. They started selling my work, and I would get, build a collector base from there. And then I did shows. So I entered quite as many shows as I could get in. This is shows sponsored by, different organizations. I started demoing and speaking before local art organizations. That spread the word. So I did a lot of stuff like that, and it built a collector base slowly.
John, I'm seeing connections here. You had a newspaper route, and the next thing you're doing, you're marketing your work by doing your own newspaper.
I hadn't thought of that. I should have rolled that thing up and thrown it, landed on the front porch of these homes.
Well, you're still doing that today, though it's digital, but you're still doing that.
The communication, staying in touch with people is just super important. The internet, of course, makes that a lot easier than earlier days. It's an ongoing process that you really can't let up on. I have to continually stay on top of it.
Well, I want to get back to this idea of where you had these bright colors as an illustrator and you needed to tone it down. You said you went outdoors. That helped with that. I'd like to explore that a little bit more about how you work to overcome that tendency of oversaturated, unnaturalistic colors. And then you started teaching, which became a big component of that as well. You're known for teaching color.
Yeah, that didn't happen at the beginning, Carl. I had what I did is when I got on location, I realized, I got to throw out my phthalo colors, which were really intense, the phthalo blues and phthalo greens and all that stuff. And so I started maybe overcompensating, but I put a lot of earth tones on the palette. Like I had a chromium oxide green, which is a real earthy green. I used the umbers, raw umber and raw sienna. So real earth tones, I used those, and that helped. But I still had at that point probably 15 colors on my palette, tube colors on the palette, because I didn't know any of this stuff about color at this point. I was just using colors I thought I needed in a painting. So the actual use of a limited palette came probably in the middle 80s. I was doing a show up in Missouri, Carthage, Missouri, called the Midwest Gathering of the Artists. And one of the founders of that show, Bob Tommy, was using a limited palette of just 3 primaries, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and a cadmium yellow. And I was so fascinated by that, I couldn't believe what he was able to achieve with these 3 colors. And so when I came home, I started experimenting with that and found out, what I can do with this. And the color, I'm not necessarily held to what I'm seeing in nature. I can create all kinds of moods with these 3 colors, and the paintings are immediately harmonious. And that just, I'd started experimenting more and more with that, but kind of not wholeheartedly into it. And then Kevin McPherson came out with a book. I can't remember the name of that book.
Fill Your Oil Paintings with Light and Color. I
think that's it. I think that was his first book. He was using a 3-color palette, and because he was such a huge name in the fine art field, if he can do this, I can do it. And that's when I switched totally. Then I went to a 3-color palette. And I was so enthralled by it. I did color charts. I was mixing color for 2 weeks, endless, morning till night, and just seeing and going, wow. I couldn't
just
believe
doing
it.
Charts.
Not even charts, just mixing color.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then eventually I did the charts, but I was just mixing and thinking and making notes and realizing, wow, if I use these 2 primaries, I get this. If I use these different primaries over here, I get a totally different color. In other words, if we're just talking greens or violets or whatever, if I just switch up the primaries, I get totally different looks, even though I'm still using a blue and a red or a blue and a yellow. And so that just, I don't know. I just thought this is incredible. And so that's basically what I've used now for 30 plus years, a limited palette of just 3 primaries. Every now and then I'll add an extra color here or there, but at the heart of my palette are just 3 primaries. And then that led to, I wanted to be a good teacher when I would teach workshops. And I knew the students, what they were really interested in, it seemed like was value and color, but primarily color. So I wanted to stress the point that, hey, color has value to it. Color does nothing if the value isn't correct. So I catered my workshops mainly towards stressing the importance of understanding value, creating a strong value structure in your painting, and then applying the color into that same value that you've created. The value, I'm speaking of the light and dark patterns from everything from white to black. And so I thought, well, maybe the best way I can do that is to create using the exact same 3 primaries, create a whole series of paintings using exactly the same subject, the same light source, same composition. The only thing that changes is the color scheme. Well, I want to explain this. The different divisions of the color wheel are broken up into triads and quadratics and analogous. And
it sounds like a geometry class.
Yeah. And I did very poor in geometry. That was one of my hardest classes in school.
But look, anyway, you conquered it. You conquered it.
Yeah. So that's what I created a lot of these paintings, and that's what I presented at the workshop, and the students were just floored by it. They couldn't believe it. And that is where I met Amanda Lovett, one of these classes, and she was so awed by it, and we became friends, and it developed from there. And that's how
she said she was transformed by attending that workshop. Transformed.
Yeah, I remember her. She was so excited and wanted to shoot pictures of everything so she could remember it all. And she was the most enthusiastic in the group.
Well, I think that your approach there fills a need. I know in my learning process, it seems like there's all these different pieces you gotta put together to become a painter. Yeah,
there is the idea of trying to increase and create interest in people to take up painting, but I guess the part that I have difficulty with is that they want to promote the fact that this is easy. It's not an easy thing. It's a lifetime of work, really.
But isn't the most satisfying things to do are the things that are hard to do?
Yeah, particularly when you achieve something of note. Yeah. Then you think, wow, all I went through to get here, that does make it worthwhile, certainly.
Yeah, we tend toward instant gratification and, following a recipe. There's a difference between following a recipe and being a chef. A person that knows the principles and knows how to put all these different ingredients together to come up with a marvelous work of art and food.
I wrote an article for a art magazine one time. This was several years ago. And I stressed this very thing that we're just talking about now. All the stuff that I went through to try to create something worthwhile. And that, this is what these are the steps you're going to have to follow in order to create good paintings. And the editor just totally trashed that whole idea and basically overwrote my copy and said, anybody can do this. And I thought, well, yeah, okay, I guess they want to sell magazines, but my goodness, it's not an easy thing.
No, I've discovered just how hard it is.
Yeah.
And I thought I worked in one of the hardest professions known to man, which is software engineering. And well, boy, was I wrong.
What's the hardest thing you find out about painting right now? What's the hardest thing for you right now?
Probably, I gotta bare my soul. I do find that my paintings are just oversaturated, and that's
too much primary. Too intense color.
Yeah, and sometimes I can even realize it while I'm doing it, and you just keep going down that road because you have so much vested in it. So there's a bit of psychology involved in it, or I don't know how I'm going to fix it other than scraping it off, which I've got a canvas sitting here that I just did that with. It just came out just all wrong. It was all bright and saturated. So there was no dynamic range to it because it was in your face. And so I scraped it off, and I'm going to start over here.
You know what'll solve that problem?
What's that?
Preliminary work.
Preliminary work. So what kind of preliminary work would you suggest that I do? I just gave you a big leading question there, John.
You sure did. Let's end this interview right now.
Now we're going into workshop territory.
Now, the preliminary work is where I would suggest working out your value structure first, and in either umbers or just black and white. And not even concern yourself with color and get those values right. It may be that you're finding, you may not realize this, but it may not be as much of an issue with color as it is with value. I'm just guessing. Do that, the preliminary work where you work out your values before you start your painting so that you get a good light and dark patterns in there.
Just doing that on a sketchbook or a piece of paper or another piece of canvas or something.
Paint.
Yeah.
Do it with oil paint. Black and white would really be good. And if that looks great in black and white, then you will use your color to match those values. In other words, you've already established the value structure of your painting. Then you just mix up color that matches those values. And the other thing too is when you're using a lot of intense color all the time, it's like you and I screaming at each other.
Right.
And a conversation, if you want to make a strong point, yes, you'll raise your voice and you'll speak louder or with more firmness. But most conversation is calm and subtle.
Yeah. So you have modulation in it.
Yes, modulation's the word. Yeah. And that's what you want in your painting. Very seldom am I ever using a primary color straight out of the tube. In other words, there are very seldom where you see a pure cadmium yellow, pure cad red, anything like that in my paintings. They're mostly all neutralized. And you neutralize a color oftentimes by, you can neutralize it somewhat by adding white to it, by adding the complement to it, by adding a little gray, in other words, a black, maybe a black to it, or some variation of black, some variation of grays to it. You'll neutralize the color, and that will tone it down. And I think you'll find that'll make the paintings much more pleasing and enduring.
I want to talk a little bit about your book, your limited palette, unlimited color. Right. Mm-hmm. But I love books, and I will often buy, a lot where, you get 20 books for $1 or $5.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
So this is a book that I picked up. I got it a couple of months ago. It was a lot of 20 books. I paid $5 for it. And in it was this old Michael Jacobs book, who was a close friend of John Carlson.
Oh.
And I opened it up. It's called Color, and it's spelled the British way, COLOUR.
Mm-hmm.
Color in Landscape Painting. It was published in the 1950s. And I'm turning the page, and there's his signature. He signed the book.
Golly.
Oh, I said, wow, this is amazing. Yeah. Have this connection with this guy. But he made an interesting comment in here. He's talking about color theory. He said he's talking about the primary pigments, which are yellow, blue, and crimson. And then he makes his parenthetical statement. He says, erroneously many times called red. And that just stood out in my mind. I said,
Yeah, he's using the printer. I think the printer term.
The CMYK? Yeah.
Yes, I think so. That's probably what that is.
That's interesting. But anyway, I digress. That book.
It is still a red. It's just, it's a cooler red. But I guess I won't argue with him.
No, I'm not. I just thought it was interesting. It's always interesting to see what they say and what. Of course, it was written back. I imagine he wrote this over a span of several years, and it was published in the early 50s, mid 50s. So it was based on the knowledge of that he had at that time. But
did he base that knowledge on what he taught, what Carlson taught him?
Well, he actually took issue with what Carlson taught him.
Oh,
yeah. So I wish I'd bookmarked where he said that, but he says, I love John Carlson. He's my dear friend, but I don't think that his chapter in his book on landscape painting he doesn't fully explain color mixing in that chapter. So I'm going to read it and see what he has to say later. But so it's interesting how everybody has different opinions. But
that's the thing. We will not all agree on everything, but I think probably the basic principles of creating good painting are the same for all of us. We'll have slight differences on some things, but they're not major points.
But the thing is, you've experimented. You have a lot of mileage trying to figure this thing out. And you've really, I guess, systematized. I'm trying to say that word. You have systematized. I
think you got it, Carl.
Systematized the learning process for color mixing with a limited palette. And I think what I take away from what little I've had a chance, I did watch some of your video on that Streamline put out, or and,
promoting the book.
Yeah, promoting the book. And I get the sense that when you talk about three primaries, you're not suggesting that in my paint drawers that I have only, cadmium yellow pale, ultramarine, and alizarin. There's more to it than that.
Oh yeah, I'm really glad you brought that out, because the purpose of the book is I wanted to really stress, hey, these are all done with just these three primaries. These are not the only three primaries you can use. But to make the point strongly, I stuck with just three specific tubes of paint, three specific primaries. But I get emails from people all the time thinking this is the only three primaries that are ever on my palette, and I have to keep telling them, no, this is just the beginning.
Well, it's like a musician learning how to play the guitar. You have different scales, and you can be within the simplest scale is, what do they call it, the pentatonic scale. It's 5 notes. That's all it is out of 12. But on those 5 notes, see, there's going to be people who are listening to this that know music, and they know that I know absolutely nothing about it now.
You notice I'm keeping totally silent.
Yes. I'm the master of using forced analogies. But you can play. It's the Native American flute, 5 keyholes. Oh. You can't go wrong. You will play a song on that scale. And I think of what you're saying is I can pick 3 colors, the 3 primaries, but then I can experiment with those 3. I can vary those primaries.
Yes.
And
whenever you change a primary, you change one of the primaries. You don't even have to change all 3. Change one of those primaries. It is going to affect all of the other mixtures. The relationship with the other 2 primaries changes.
So,
for instance, if you use, say, for instance, you use a cerulean blue, which is all artists will know what that is.
Yeah, it's got a greenish bias to it. Yeah.
You use a cerulean blue and a lemon yellow. Okay. You will have a pretty intense green that you can create with that. But what if you switch that yellow out to, say, a cadmium yellow? You're still using the same cerulean blue. Your green will turn to olive. It'll be totally different. And that is just switching one primary. So you can imagine if you switch all 3, what's going to happen, or switch 2 of 3, you'll get another whole range of color. So what I teach, and the important thing is, okay, how do you select those primaries? And that's one of the lessons. So one needs to determine what color is most important to achieve in a painting that you propose to do.
So what is the dominant color?
Yeah, say for instance, there's a particular green in the landscape that you're wanting to capture.
Okay.
How you would determine the primaries is you would select a variety of blues and a variety of yellows and mix those together. One blue and one yellow, but mix them up and see which combination of those 2 primaries gives you something that's closest to the green you want. And then you have 2 primaries now that need to be on your palette. And then the 3rd primary, the red, is pretty easy to determine because that will neutralize those greens. And so you will use that to create another whole variety of green just by neutralizing those greens with red. And then the blue with the red, that will determine your violets, how intense those violets are and what they're going to look like. And so, yeah, it's all interrelated. So just changing up one primary really changes everything. And so one could do another whole book. I did this book here, 46 paintings using just 3 primaries. We'll change up one of those. I could do another whole book.
Does that mean there's a volume 2 coming?
Gosh, I hope not. Hey, this was a lot of work.
Yeah, book publishing is hard from what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. So in this book, you have 46 paintings
Mm-hmm.
And according to the information, it says it's divided into 7 major divisions of the color wheel. Now, this is where it really sounds like a geometry book, but I don't think it's that. It doesn't have to be this scary, right? But
no, it's not.
You mentioned complements, equilateral triads, isosceles triads, square quadratics, rectangular quadratics,
right?
Extended analogous, and primary dominant. Hey, I did not memorize that. I'm reading that, okay?
No, it proves you can read. That's good.
That's about it. And that's questionable at that. Well,
yeah, that's it. 7 major divisions. Yeah.
Okay.
And so the purpose of that is that, believe it or not, one could create a pretty exciting painting using just 2 colors. You know, the complements, for instance, a red and a green. You could do, plus your white, of course. We're always adding white to the scene, but just those 2, you'd be amazed what can be done.
Does black ever enter the equation?
I've started using black in my palette, but generally, no. I don't encourage the use of black, particularly for the young painter,
right?
Because what they will do is they will use it all the time to darken the color, and it'll kill the color. So I don't even talk about black, but I use black in my paintings more and more frequently. But I don't teach it.
You got to be careful with it, huh?
Yeah, no, you really do. Yeah. So I recommend, if you want to darken a color, then you pick primaries that are already pretty dark. For instance, you could use an ultramarine, which is a very dark blue, and say the alizarin or an Indian. Let's see, what would be a good red? Probably an Indian red, something like that will give you pretty dark violets. That way, you can get your dark colors through using dark tube colors.
Well, very nice. I'm going to include a link to your book. I think what's unique about the book, Amanda was talking about this, how it's a lay flat book. It has clear acrylic sheets. You can buy extra sheets as you wear them out, so you can experiment right over it. So it's a very practical learning device for an artist.
I wanted a spiral bound book, not a book that was bound. Typically bound is in a bookstore, because I wanted it as a workbook, and so the pages in the book are really heavy too. It's not going to wear out, and that's what the students and all those that have purchased this book really appreciate. This is a very practical book, and I viewed it from the beginning as a workbook, not a read it and put it on the shelf kind of book. It's something they keep in the studio right by them, and they can use it for ideas and inspiration.
What's next for you, John?
Well, I'm continually working on paintings every day. I paint, and I've got a show coming up later in the year here at the Western Art Museum in Kerrville. And then I'm working on a couple of commissions now also. So yeah, I'm doing that, but I'm always thinking up other ideas of things I want to create. So, it's all about creation for me. And I've just completed, I worked with Streamline on their recent Plein Air Live, which was interesting. I had to create a video for them.
So you had to create the video in advance. Yeah,
I had to create it in advance. And I spoke about one of the things we were talking about here, Carl, and that is how to select these primaries. And I spent a half hour really showing and mixing paint, showing how to determine primaries. And I did it by this very thing we talked about, was mixing greens, how to mix greens and how to select the green that you want. So I had two different blues out and 4 different yellows out, and we just experimented with what would happen by just switching yellow. And it was, I think, quite informative. I've heard from quite a few people. It's really helped them. So
yeah, very nice. Is that still available?
It's on you kind of have to buy the
whole event.
Buy it, the event, yeah.
Okay. John, what kind of goals do you set for yourself as a painter?
I don't have any real goals. In other words, I want to be in such a show or all that.
Right.
That's really not my motivation as much as probably for most artists, just want to continue to improve and do paintings that really strike a chord with the viewer. And when that happens, that is probably the most satisfactory thing. Like you stated at the beginning, how my paintings make you feel. and they recall your childhood and your grandmother and the biscuits and the lard and all that.
The lard biscuits.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that makes painting so worthwhile and satisfying, I think. So when that happens, I love it. It makes it all worthwhile.
Well, John, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you on The Artful Painter. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Carl. I appreciate talking to you, and wish you all the best.
John was truly a gracious guest today. I deeply appreciate him taking the time to speak with us. I'm just fascinated by his thoughts about using a limited palette to create unlimited color. You be sure to check out his website. It's pototschnik.com. I have a link in the show notes for this episode. You can find the show notes on carlolson.tv under podcasts, and under podcast, you will see The Artful Painter, and it should be you should be able to find it there. But I have links in the show note for it. You can also check out his book, Limited Palette, Unlimited Color. There's also a companion video for that. I have links to that as well. So I'd like to share some feedback with you that has been sent to me and The Artful Painter. One of the things that surprises me is how much this podcast is listened to on YouTube. YouTube is not a podcasting platform. However, I do send an audio-only version to YouTube because a number of people do find it convenient to listen to it. Now, every once in a while, you'll see on the videos, there'll be a thumbs down or two. And I think that's from people who are expecting to see a video and they're disappointed that all they hear is audio. I'm sorry to those folks. I can't please everyone with that. My intent is to produce more video versions of it, but that takes considerable effort, and it also creates a tremendous demand on my guests, and not all are equipped to do video versions of this podcast, and I don't want to put that burden on them. I will have a few extras coming, though, so watch out for those. But back to my main point. So the other day, YouTube snuck in a change that caught me off guard. It's the way they position ads in the middle of a video. They call it mid-roll ads. And what they did is they made shorter videos eligible to run mid-roll ads. But their default way to implement that was to change all my videos, disregard the ad settings that I had on there, and implement mid-roll ads on every single video. I had to go in. I spent nearly an hour going in and changing those, but I would have never known this happened if it was not for listener Judy Palermo. She wrote, she was listening to the Kyle Ma interview on YouTube, and this is what she said. She says, "Loved the interview, but hated that commercials interrupted about every 3 minutes. Insane. Judy, I agree with you. That is unacceptable. And I apologize to everyone that was blasted by all those ads." So I have since then gone in and changed those settings to be less intrusive. I have to allow some ads to play because that contributes to the funding of this podcast. Not very much, mind you, but it does help. But I don't want it to be very intrusive. Generally, there will be an ad at the beginning, and then there will be an ad at the end of the video. Some of the longer videos, I might elect to turn on maybe one mid-roll ad, but I haven't done that. But anyway, that's what happened, and I appreciate Judy for letting me know. Okay, another comment I just wanted to talk about is I did a test live stream last Friday. I want to do a series, a regular series called Technology for Artists, Ask Me Anything, AMA. So I just did a test run. It was very short notice, and I noticed some people were disappointed that they weren't able to join. For example, Margaret Koff wrote, Oh no, I missed the live stream. I didn't see this until it was too late to watch it. I hope it went well. Hey, Margaret, it did. And I will give better notice going forward, at least a day's notice. It depends. If I could do even more, that would be great. But sometimes it's hard to get all the moving pieces together with my schedule and everything. So I'm sorry that everyone missed it, but it was just a test run, a dry run. So, but we'll have another one coming up, and just watch your inbox for an email from me on that. Let's see here. In fact, Lorenzo says it was great to listen to your YouTube show. Thank you for all the great tech ideas and suggestions. Lorenzo Chavez is. You've got to check out his website, by the way, lorenzochavez.com. Just an amazing artist. My goodness. But anyway, Lorenzo, thank you for joining the show and sharing that feedback with me. Okay, I got this email from Linda. She says, "Hi, Carl. I knew podcast existed, but had never listened to one prior to discovering yours a few days ago. Wow. I absolutely love The Artful Painter. I listen while I work on my art. I'm endeavoring to learn as much as I can, as fast as I can, taking classes, workshops, reading, watching videos, but your podcast just added a whole new wonderful tool for me. They are entertaining and chock full of information. Your skill in interviewing artists is wonderful. What a joy to listen to." And then she makes this comment, which is an interesting thought, and I may explore this further in a future episode, not necessarily of the podcast, but maybe on YouTube in a YouTube video. But she says, "It seems to me, maybe it's not true, but it seems that so many of today's professional artists work in oil instead of watercolor. They probably are well versed in watercolor, but seem to mainly work in oil. It seems that the vast majority of videos available for sale and on YouTube are using oils. I would love to listen to a program discussing the subject. Why oils over watercolor so much? Just curious. Anyway, thanks so much for your time. And thanks so much for the Artful Painter podcast and your website. You are so good at what you do. I appreciate it so much." Linda, thank you. I appreciate your kind words about that. It's a work in progress doing the podcast. But your question about oils over watercolor, I can't answer that at this time. I know that I personally have a bias toward oil, but I do love all the mediums, including watercolor. In fact, you're not the first person to mention this to me, that even on my show, there is that bias toward oils, and I need to have more in the way of watercolor artists, and I will do that. In fact, I just bought a course that was on Domestica. Andrew Hilkhurst, I think is his name, remarkable American watercolorist living in Paris, France. So I took that course, I bought it and took it, and it encouraged me to start experimenting more with watercolor, but I digress. It's a good question. I'll explore it perhaps in a future YouTube episode. And hopefully I'll have more in the way of artists whose primary medium is watercolor. Okay, here's another one. Tahila writes, "Just wanted to say hi. I moved recently to Sandy Springs from Northern California and was looking to become involved in the local art scene. I've been painting and teaching for many years, and the last 15 years I dedicated myself to using the gift of art that I was so lucky to have with patients as an art therapist in California." Wow, that's interesting. That is very interesting. I'll just say a little footnote, and I think I've mentioned this before, but in many respects, painting is kind of like therapy to me. It's a very calming effect. I have a type A personality, and so doing art really slows me down, slows my mind down, and gets me in a very calm, soothing place. But anyway, I digress. She mentions that she's getting back to painting and she would love to connect with some local artists. And she says, I find your website and your newsletter so beautiful and inspiring. Tahila, I appreciate that. By the way, her website, she did provide a link, so I'll give it to you. I'll put it in the show notes as well. It's tahila-art.com. So that's an interesting question. When you move, where do you find the community? Now, bear in mind, my community is, my experience with it is very limited as well. It's slowly growing. But I think a good place in Georgia to start is the Booth Museum. It's more than a museum. There's the Booth Artists Guild, and there's also the Booth Art Academy. Both incredibly valuable resources, and I know it has really expanded my horizons. I have met a number of artists through my association with the Booth Museum. So go to boothmuseum.org. You can check out their links to their academy and their Artists Guild. That's a great way to start. I know there's probably several other resources here in Georgia, but that's a good place to begin. I want to thank my associate producers. Who are the associate producers? What do they do? Well, they're people who give financial support to the Artful Painter with their generous donations. So they really don't have to do anything more than that. But I just like calling them associate producers because they do have a role in the success of this podcast. So who are they? It's Alan Bloom, Jeffrey Eichhoff, Richard Husband, Brett Kimber, Jonathan McPhillips, Jim McVicker, Margaret Miller, Debbie Mueller, Frank Wash, and Colleen White. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I deeply appreciate the support. If you would like to become an associate producer of The Artful Painter, go to carlolson.tv and click on the Donate tab in my website. Well, I love hearing from everyone. If you would like to send me a note, ask a question, just whatever, I love hearing from you. So just go to my website again, carlolson.tv, and click the Contact tab. Again, links are in the show notes. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Artful Painter. I'll see you in the next episode.
Picture on the TV.